Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. I'm Jill Noel, founder of Hosted by Jill, Global Women in EV Day and a co-founding director of Electric Vehicle Association England. I am delighted to be your host today, and I'm even more delighted that we are joined by Naomi Nye, Head of Sales for Drax Electric Vehicles. Naomi, it's so great to have you with us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you so much, Jill. And it's so lovely to be here. So as you mentioned there, I am Naomi Nye. My role at Drax is head of sales. So I really lead the sales team and make sure that we're talking to our customers, really understanding their business requirements for electrification, particularly around fleet, hubs, retail sort of destinations, and making sure that we're providing them with the right proposition and then doing that full turnkey end-to-end solution. So that's sort of where we sit in the market. For those who don't know Drax, we are an energy company. So we're part of the national critical infrastructure in the UK. We supply renewable power for our customers, and we can really bring that whole piece together with electrification and optimization services as well. So really exciting kind of part of the market to be in.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Naomi. And before we kind of really get into the practical challenges around fleet electrification, I'd love to start with people, because ultimately progress in this space is driven by individuals as much as it's driven by technology. And you're supporting the GreenFleet 100 Most Influential, which is of course GreenFleet's recognition of individuals driving progress in fleet decarbonisation. So how important do you think it is to really acknowledge and to celebrate individual leadership and achievement within the industry?
Yeah, I think it's so important. I think in this industry particularly, it moves so fast, right? There is always new stuff coming in, innovation, things changing. And I think people that are really driving that and driving that change, it's really important to recognize and celebrate them, but also understand where the market's moving, understanding what new is coming in. So for me, I mean, I followed GF100 from when it first started back in the day. And the exciting piece for me is seeing those new entrants, what's new to the market. And I think people emulate behavior that they're seeing as well. So, all that good stuff that's happening, all that positivity in the space, it's raising the profile of the industry, it's educating, and it's kind of really driving that collaboration piece that really makes it work, because that's what it's about, right? Not one company can do everything. It's about how we collaborate together to make it work. And I think that's part of what GF100 does.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, and I also love to see those new people coming through, maybe especially the young kind of female professionals that are coming through into the industry, and let's celebrate them.
Yeah.
So the idea of leadership and visibility is a really good link actually into the really bigger picture, because many of the people being recognised through GreenFleet 100 are doing so in the face of actually some pretty complex challenges. Mm-hmm. So if we look ahead now, if we put ourselves in the shoes of a fleet manager planning for the next couple of years, what do you see as the three biggest challenges facing those fleet managers as they move to electrify, and what solutions would you recommend to them?
Yeah, so I think when we're speaking to customers, I think those three challenges that they have probably been the three challenges that have kind of been in place since day one. I don't think they're changing. So I think first and foremost, I think cost is always up there. People don't understand the cost of electrifying. I think fleet managers in particular are very used to dealing with vehicles, 3 and 5 year cycles. They know how that works. Infrastructure is a whole new piece that has to go into play. And I think it's new for many areas of the business as well. So it's not as if you have an expert normally on board within the company that can kind of advise you. You have to bring that external support in. And then it's where to go, who to speak to, what's it going to look like, what's the cost of it, and how do we do it? So I think cost is probably up there. I think the second one that I think people really sort of think about is those operational challenges. So if they're electrifying, particularly now as we're seeing the market shift to bigger vehicles that we're electrifying and the complexity that comes with that, how do they fit that within their operational challenges, and how do they make that work? And the third, probably leading on for that, with kind of these larger vehicles coming through, thinking about the power requirements and what that looks like, how are they going to look at that from a capacity perspective? So we deal with a lot of energy managers who, you know, costs are rising for businesses, energy costs are rising. They're thinking, how do we bring those costs down? And then you have a fleet manager, you know, over here kind of saying, well, I'm looking to electrify, and actually I'm now using electricity as a fuel. So those costs are kind of going up again. So, and, you know, can we actually put the infrastructure in that we need in the first instance? Because, you know, these places weren't designed to be fuel stations. So how do you bring all of that together? So I think for me, you're looking at cost, operation and capacity. And I think it's having those experts coming in and really holding your hand through the process and talking you through each of those phases. So in order to kind of fix that, I guess, or put some solutions in place, there are a number of different things you can do. You know, you can look at funding, financing, leasing. There's all sorts of different things that you can work with costs. You can phase things out, which helps from your operational perspective as well. So you can learn as you go. You can speak to other fleet managers and get those learnings from them as well. You know, what's worked for you, what hasn't. And think about, you know, we talk in the industry around, you know, low-hanging fruit. Is there low-hanging fruit we can look at? Is there examples of how other people have done it that we can almost copy as a blueprint if we're in the same kind of business environment? And then capacity is a bit more of a struggle, I guess. A lot of people think they're going to have to go in and do DNO upgrades kind of straight away. That's not always the case. We can look at charging schedules. We can look at load management. You know, how do we do that with load balancing and smart charging? How do we think about using optimization services? You know, we've got flexible kind of services that we can work with there that all can help manage that load. And we can play with that on a site-by-site basis as well. So there's a number of different solutions that can help with those challenges. But it's really important that you're kind of aware of them and you discuss them and you get that planning in place first and foremost, because there can be some really expensive mistakes, I think, if that doesn't happen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Naomi. And, you know, the grid always comes up as a massive challenge, but as you say, if you can optimize, if you can use smart charging, then there are solutions out there that may mean that you don't need, whether it's you know, maybe ultimately, I guess a site may need a grid upgrade, but in the interim there could be solutions or even longer term. And so you've touched on challenges that affect sort of all fleets when it comes to electrification, but maybe there's one part of the sector where those pressures really do intensify. So let's focus in on heavy goods vehicles for a moment. You might say that HGV electrification is still at a relatively early stage. What charging strategies do you believe are most effective for truck operators who are starting to look at this transition to electrification?
Yeah, it's definitely a topical subject at the moment. And I think with the HGV, we are probably in a situation, we've been through it before with cars, right? Cars were new. How do we do it with cars? And then it was commercial vans, and they come in with slightly more complexities. They're slightly bigger, you know, accessible issues, more power, etc. And then we're doing the same again now with EHGVs. And those complexities have got larger. And they are a big challenge. Costs are a huge challenge, I think, when it comes to it. Even just the cost of the vehicle, right? How do you bring it all together and make it work? And there are companies out there. So Welch's have done an amazing job with their sort of EHGV, and they're starting to put together, you know, templates and data, you know, that people can see and how it can work and how it can actually be a successful part of their strategy. But I think looking at it, I think it is going back to that, you know, have you got low-hanging fruit that you can look at? Is there, you know, some of these vehicles that are doing maybe set routes where you can think about, you know, your depot and your base? I think I always think about starting with your data, start at your base where you can, if you can put in depot charging, think about how that works, and then you kind of build out from there. So again, it's about not trying to do everything in one go, not trying to think, right, we've got to do all of this stuff. Where do we start? But actually start small. Pick off the things that you can start to think about. And I think with the HGV, it is around capacity. It is around, you know, the speed of charge. And I think when we're looking at the more complex cases where we haven't got those set routes and we're thinking about, you know, using maybe public infrastructure, we're seeing some great stuff at the moment kind of happening around big hubs that are going in for EHGVs. I know that GridServe just opened a couple. They've kind of advertised and put those out there, which is some fantastic work that's happening. We're seeing a lot around depot sharing. I think that's really important. So those buses that are those, you know, standard routes and easy to kind of electrify to a certain extent. You can put, your funding in at your depot either ends and they're charging there. They might be charging overnight. So during the day when they're out, they're actually opening them out to, the wider space and thinking about utilising those as a sharing space for EHGVs. So there's a lot of stuff out there at the moment. There's a lot of work going into it. We're seeing funding kind of coming through for this as well. But again, I think it's just going back to the basics. It's understanding what's your business trying to achieve, what are the operational complexities that you have, and you would get those from your data. Make sure you've got your data so you know what you're trying to achieve in the first instance, and then layering on a plan and then layering on your finances. Exactly the same way as you did, with the earlier transitions from cars and commercial vans. These are it's another section that you need to think about, but work through in a very similar way. And utilise, the learnings that are already out there. I think get the experts in and see what's going on and do the research.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Naomi. And one question that always springs to my mind when talking about EHGV charging is, in your view, do you consider that megawatt charging is the silver bullet?
I think, again, it depends on the use case. It completely depends, because EHGVs, they're used in so many different business operations. It depends on the business operational use case. You'll have some that, you can probably have a much lower DC charger that will work adequately as well. Back in the day, I remember, with electrification of vehicles, people automatically wanted DC chargers because they were quick and they were fast. And it doesn't necessarily mean that's going to work for the use case that you have. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best charger for you. It's all about, for me, having the right charge point in the right place, doing the right job. And that has to be taken into account when you look at it. It all comes from the planning. But the bigger stuff is exciting, right? It's exciting to see that coming through. It's exciting to hear about the new technology. It's exciting to hear about how quick, these things are going to be. But then the flip side of that, you've also got then capacity grid and how that's going to work there. So, it's making sure you've got everything covered.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. And I guess that, there is a lot that fleet operators can do themselves, but they can't do everything in isolation. So Absolutely. That's where that support comes into it, isn't it? Yeah. And hopefully that neatly takes us to the role of government and policy in enabling this transition. So what government policies or interventions would you most like to see introduced in this year, in 2026, to help really accelerate fleet electrification?
I think there's a number of things. For me, I think when we're thinking about government and policy, it's all about leading from the front, right? And I think, we had the Z mandate in place, and then we saw a bit of backtracking, a bit of reconsultation, and then it's kind of in place again, slightly tweaked. And then there's talk about, again, of it going under consultation. For me, it's about, we have to have a strong stance. It's about leading from the front. Let's do this. Let's make this happen. It's working, right? It is working. And we've just got to stay strong with it. So that for me is the first and foremost, kind of lead that from the front and keep pushing for that. I think the other thing I'd probably like to see from government is probably a little bit around that leading from the front thing with public sector fleets, kind of mandating emission targets, mandating electrification in some of those fleets, maybe publishing some of that, because then people will follow, and particularly if we're doing it with ones that are publicly funded as well. I think that would be a really good way of kind of encouraging even further uptake and even further movement in the sector. And I think for me, things that we've had in 2025, initiatives such as the depot funding, particularly for fleets, I think has gone down really well. I know we had a number of customers that we've worked with to get that depot funding, which has been fantastic. It's really allowed them to accelerate. So maybe some more of that. And maybe some more around funding for EHGVs, funding for those markets that are struggling a bit with trying to get the infrastructure in place that they need in order to transition. So if we can get maybe some funding for those, particularly in those kind of corridors where these HGVs are going to be moving, if we can put some, funding, get some momentum moving in those areas, it's a good start. So I think for me, they're probably my initial thoughts. The other things I think that come into play when we're thinking about fleets is that we're seeing a lot more now of kind of mixed infrastructure. I think people think about fleets as being depot or commercially charged. But actually, there is the value of home charging in with your depot. There's the value of, having charge points at your commercial sites, and equally the value of also using the public network as and when you need to. And I think some fleets are really thinking about that mix up now and how do they look at those costs. So making that, I think, a bit more fair to be able to use each of those different types of infrastructure, if you like, in a very fair way. So things like the VAT cost on the public charges, making it more expensive, kind of bringing that down, reducing that, these kind of things that policy can do to make it easier and more convenient, and just really kind of keep the momentum going. I think these are the things that we should be seeing, and hopefully we'll see more of over the next coming months and years.
Yeah, let's hope so. Are there any policies that exist right now but you think if they were just refined a little bit, they'd be really effective for fleets?
So I think where we're seeing things come through, particularly around kind of capacity, right? So if I think about capacity and DNO upgrades, at the moment that's quite a clunky process. There is a process there, there's policies there, there's ways of doing things, but it's still quite clunky. Smoothing that out, making that easier, making it faster. It's all about just streamlining, I think, some of these things, so that it's easier to put the kit in the ground that is needed to go in for the transition to happen. Because lots of people focus on the cars. They think about the cars or vehicles or vans or whatever it may be. They think about the actual vehicle that's being electrified, when in essence, if you haven't got the right infrastructure in place and you don't think about that infrastructure piece first and foremost, then it will fall over very, very quickly. So let's focus on that. Let's focus on the infrastructure. The vehicles will continue to churn and change and develop and adapt, but the infrastructure has to be there. And I think anything we can do to streamline, make that easier, make it more convenient, just make it easier to use. Things like the public charging regs, for people when they're out, it should be about that consumer usage. Payments, I know that we talk about this a lot, having payments available and being able to know what you're being charged. It's all these things that it's actually, whilst they're out there as policies, it's making sure they're being implemented and it's making sure that they're working. So it's those kind of things I think we think about refining.
Yeah, and I think it's always keeping the driver at the heart of it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Making sure that it works, just works.
Yeah.
So if we step back from policy and technology for a moment, what's your sense of momentum right now? Are fleets feeling more confident than they were a year ago, and what gives you the most optimism about the next phase of the transition?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of in two halves, really. I think there are a number of fleets out there that were early adopters and that did an incredible job of putting a lot of infrastructure in, and they're almost at second level now. They've made their mistakes or they've been through their learnings, and they're now trying to refine their EV strategy. And maybe going back to basics a bit, thinking, right, now we've got this in, how do we now make this better? And how do we make it work for what we're looking at now? Because your business needs have changed and adapted, and how do you kind of carry that with you? So in that sense, there's a lot of momentum, because we've kind of gone through that learning curve. It's where they haven't gone through a learning curve yet, and there's still an initial, technology is moving so fast, I'm a little bit unsure. And this is where it's so important to kind of see that leading from the front, particularly from public and government, where people are a bit unsure. We're bringing in like the tax on the mileage. People are like, oh well, hang on a minute, if I'm starting to have to pay per mile for electric, suddenly that's a bit of a negative again, when I was already not quite sure whether I wanted to do it, even though that's not coming in until 2028, and whether it does come in or not is another question. But this is where they need the confidence. Consumer needs the confidence in it. And that's where I think we're still seeing a bit of stalling in the momentum, and we're still having to very much go through an education piece. And we're having conversations with customers, so the same conversations that I was having 10, 12 years ago with customers, they're the same conversations that we're having now. So this is why it's so important to keep that education going, keep it very visible, keep pushing, keep making sure that we are covering all these things off that we need to cover off.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Naomi. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, as always. You've shared some really valuable insights, and it's really clear that organisations like Drax Electric Vehicles are really playing a crucial role in helping fleet operators to navigate the transition, not only with confidence but with resilience. Thank you to everyone listening. If you found today's discussion useful, do keep an eye out for future episodes of GreenFleet Talks, where we'll continue exploring the people and the projects that are shaping the future of fleet decarbonisation. Until next time, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jill.